to John's Box and to part 3 of God's Wonderful Railway at Swindon, and in this part we'll be looking at the Railway Village, which is over 150 years old, would you believe. It's part of Swindon's history, its heritage. Many of the buildings are now listed, and of course their values are extremely high if you want to buy one of the cottages there. We'll be looking at how the village was built and what it was like to live there, particularly in the 19th century, and also what other institutions were within it. And would you believe that the railway village had the first free health service in the United Kingdom? Now, if I'm wrong there, put me right. And indeed it was Nibethan who, when trying to set up the National Health Service, pointed to Swindon as having the first National Health Service. Before the railways, nothing moved faster than a horse, and many people walked or came by canals to New Swindon. But where would they live when the nearest settlement was ancient Swindon, a tiny market town on the nearby hilltop, over a mile away? In secondary high school, one of our teachers, I think it was the history teacher, organised a class trip to the railway village. It was back in the early 1980s, and I do remember not only visiting the railway museum building with some of the locomotives, some of the great locomotives, but also the railway museum house. I did take my camera and I did take some photos, but I can't, right now I can't find them. I don't know where they are. I've managed to salvage one of them, which was the central, this one here, Central Community Centre, and just two in my album. One is of the museum house, and that's where that was, I think, number 34, which inside showed how people lived at the time. And there was also this shot of Station Road near the railway works, when it was still open. Actually, the railway works closed in 1986. I thought it would be a good idea just to reflect on that. Shame that I haven't got any other photos to show you. In 1841, the Great Western Railway Company began construction work on a major new engineering works which would become, in their heyday, one of the largest industrial complexes in the world. The chosen location was open farmland some 2 miles from the small hilltop market town of Swindon. The lack of existing housing in the vicinity of the works meant that it quickly became necessary to provide accommodation for the influx of workers. There was no spare housing there, so a new village was ordered by the GWR board from Mr. Brunel, an estate of 300 cottages, including a number of shops on the corners and a barracks building for crowds of single workmen. The railway village was planned when the Great Western Railway Company's 7-foot-wide broad-gauge line reached Swindon in 1840. From the outset, there was considerable difficulty in providing accommodation for the employees at the Swindon Railway Works, and the solution was to build a model village using Bath stone, most probably from the cutting out of Box Tunnel, and stone from the Swindon quarries. Came from afar to work on the Great Western Railway. They included the finest and most ambitious of mechanical engineers and artisans of the age of steam, flocking to Swindon from all parts of the British Isles. They also included many former agricultural workers who who were being forced off the land by machinery. The open field was left at the centre, lined with trees, which served as a promenade until 1854, when it was built upon. The village was completed by 1842. The development of the railway village was on the lines of similar Victorian-era socially encompassing lifestyle concepts, such as that at Bourneville, but architect-builder Rigby's were given licence to create a commercially viable development by the GWR. The completed village provided to the town medical and educational facilities that had been sorely lacking, plus St Mark's Church and the Baker's Arms public houses, all completed before 1850. The Mechanics' Institution and Medical Fund Hospital were built in the nearby open area, named Emlyn Square, after Viscount Emlyn, a GWR worker, and all that was left was to house the railway workers in the often overcrowded two-storey cottages.
If you've managed to get this far into the video, well done, thumbs up to you. Well, statistics show that probably you're not one of my subscribers. Thank you if you are, of course. I am grateful for every one subscriber that I have. In order to get a notification of future videos that I make, and they do come out at least twice a week, subscribe and press on the bell to get notifications. And I want my channel to grow, but without your support that won't happen. So thank you very much once again, and enjoy the rest of this video. Cheers.
The terraced two-storey cottages were built on 2 blocks of 4 parallel streets, not dissimilar in appearance to passing trains. Each road was named after the destinations of trains that passed nearby, Bristol, Bath, Taunton, London, Oxford and Reading among them. Built in the nearby open area, named Emlyn Square after GWR director Viscount Emlyn, later known as John Campbell, 1st Earl Cawdor, was the Mechanics' Institute, paid for via subscription by the workers. Designed and constructed by Edward Roberts, it was completed in 1855, containing the UK's first lending library, and provided health services to workers. The railway village thrived alongside the works. However, the village was not without its problems. In 1859, Daniel Gooch issued a warning notice about the boys of the railway village. It read, "It having come to my knowledge that many of the boys of New Swindon are very unruly and mischievous in their conduct, especially during the evenings, when property is frequently damaged and, as on recent occasion, life endangered, I hereby give notice that any person in the service of the company reported to me as being disorderly, firing cannons, or making improper use of firearms in the village, be discharged." Enlarged in 1892-93, Nye Bevan, mastermind of the National Health Service, later said, "There was a complete health service in Swindon. All we had to do was expand it to the country." Following the Second World War, the railway village continued to provide housing and services to the railway workers, but in the 1950s and 1960s, the work started to fall into decline, and so did the housing and other buildings in the village. Some of the houses were rented to undesirable folk, who helped to accelerate the village into an unattractive place to live. So much so that in the 1960s, Swindon Borough Council applied to demolish much of the village, but poet and railway enthusiast Sir John Betjeman led a successful campaign to preserve it. Praise must therefore go to the poet laureate, who was famous for his words, inviting bombs to fall on nearby Slough. Happily, he had much higher opinion of Swindon's architectural merits. In fact, without his vociferous crusade to save the railway village in the 1960s, it would have been demolished by Swindon Borough Council. Instead, the village was given a statutory listing as being of special architectural or historical interest. Today, much of the village is a conservation area, and many structures within it are listed buildings. The Trust has taken a keen interest in the Railway Village community today and has undertaken a range of activities and projects in the area and continue to be a key stakeholder for both those living there and the physical environment of the conservation area. Current work in the area consists of the following: the Central Community Centre, GWR Park Committee, the Children's Fate Committee, an audit of heritage assets in the conservation area. Swindon's Railway Village is a local gem and a nationally listed treasure. For connoisseurs of superb architecture and heritage buffs alike, there is really only one place to start a visit to Swindon, the town's Grade 2 listed railway village, a lovingly preserved grid of streets located next to the town's railway station, and a unique example of a Victorian development for an industrial workforce. Today, to walk around the village is to step back in time some 190 years, a fascinating insight best capped by a visit to the Railway Village Museum at 34 Farringdon Road. Now managed by the Mechanics Institute Trust, the interior of the former cottage has been restored to show just how a large family plus lodgers would have lived circa 1900, with 3 bedrooms and an 1890s extension which gave the residents a kitchen. Visitors can wander around the cottage and examine Victorian kitchen gadgets and children's toys, take a peek at the outdoor toilet, and see the souvenirs from GWR trip holidays in the front parlour. Also, find out how a mangled worked and or what glove stretchers and button hooks were used for. After a visit to the cottage and a leisurely stroll around the railway village, it's just a 5-minute walk to 2 other great attractions: Steam Museum of the Great Western Railway and the Designer Outlet Swindon, both housed in buildings that were also part of the GWR.
So that's it for another episode of God's Wonderful Railway at Swindon. I'll be back next year in 2022 for part 4, which will be the lines and the stations in and around Swindon. There are several lines and stations worth a mention, including the now defunct Stratton Halt. So that will be after the new year. So thank you very much for staying to the end. Don't forget to do all the usual YouTube stuff, such as commenting, liking or disliking also helps, and above all subscribing if you're not already a subscriber. Take care and see you in the new year. Bye.